I feel like I need to get a little more energy in. Hold on, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I know. I just got my vaccines yesterday, so I am.
Oh, you're
So
okay.
we're both
Bridge
doing
to
our best.
Terabithia.
hmm
Bridge.
Yeah.
Just hype ourselves up. This is Burn This Book, a podcast where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is Bridge to Terabithia by Katherine Paterson, which was published in 1977.
A quick summary with lots of spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, just stop listening to this podcast episode. But the summary is, this is a story about a boy named Jesse, and he is in his adolescence, excited to be the fastest boy in school. And a new girl moves into town, and she turns out to be the fastest. They become friends. She dies. He is sad, and he has to figure that out. There are questions. There are a lot of questions about religion. Is she going to hell because she wasn't religious? There's a lot of stuff about like living in a small town, not knowing who to talk to about losing your friend at such a young age. I feel like that covers it. It was a very quick read. It was very short, and the pacing was so fast. So I just think Katherine was brilliant. And
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the pacing was really fast. I did feel like I felt like it ended kind of too quickly for me. Like it kind of wrapped up the whole mourning process and grieving experience for Jesse a little too quickly, that I was like, that feels unrealistic. But I felt like it, yeah. So maybe actually I'm going to take it back. I don't think the pacing was perfect. I feel like it spent too long developing the relationship between Jesse and Leslie, and then the morning after Leslie's death was really quick and confusing for me. What do you think, Eden?
I think it was a good pacing for a children's book.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right.
I think because like the way I imagine it, like 8-year-olds or 11-year-olds. Well, it was hard for me to believe that Leslie was 10 or 11. I'm like, you are too precocious to be 10.
Yeah.
But the I don't know, it's probably in line with how children deal with death. Where like 1 second you're like, I don't know what's going on, so I'm gonna move on, and then probably just grief
Yeah.
hitting differently.
Yeah. I think you're right. It reminded me a little bit of the book Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. In that the main character was kind of Jesse, and the protagonist in Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl were kind of similar, in that they were both kind of outsiders, didn't really have a lot of friends, and their connection to community was in this girl, who was also a massive outsider, and it was a lot of developing that relationship. And yeah, I don't know. I do think it was interesting that this book was based on a true story on Catherine's son's best friend, Lisa. And David Paterson was eventually the one who co-wrote and directed, or did he direct, or did he just produce the movie version?
Yeah.
Let me fact check that.
Yeah, the book is even dedicated to both David and Lisa. And after David read it, he said, this needs to be dedicated to Lisa too.
Oh, so tender.
So sweet.
Oh, okay. He produced and co-wrote the screenplay for the film. And I think it's also important to note, Katherine comes from a very religious background. She was born in China because her parents were Presbyterian missionaries in China. And she planned on continuing that. And her first work was for the Presbyterian church. And so I found it really interesting that in this book, she kind of critiques religion with a critical affection. And she does it in a way that I think I wouldn't have assumed that she was religious or non-religious. I don't think I could have. I couldn't feel a bias in her from reading the book, which I thought was really impressive and fascinating to me, knowing her background. There's even a conversation where Jesse's like, is Leslie going to go to hell? And the dad's like, no, God wouldn't send little girls to hell. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Even though that is part of what's taught if she wasn't baptized. And so I thought that was really fascinating that she was able to put those things in there without projecting her own experiences.
It's like her own take on, well, it being a semi-autobiographical story. Well, not autobiographical. Semi-true story. Sorry.
Semi-nonfiction. Yeah.
Semi-nonfiction, partially true story. I think this was also written as probably she had similar conversations with her own son, David, of about his friend Lisa. She was 8 years old and she was struck by lightning and died. So she wrote this to make sense of the death of that 8-year-old. And you can see that too, knowing her background of just like, well, why did this happen? Like, this girl was full of life and so precocious and so funny.
That's
and
like too precocious for a 10-year-old.
Too precocious. And like an act of God, getting struck by lightning, you know?
Yeah.
What happens to her?
I love that you brought that up because it does feel like the best books I've read so far, the ones that had the clearest direction, were rooted in that question of how could this happen? And it does feel like there are explorations, like Toni Morrison's Beloved was a question of like, how did this happen? How did this woman end up killing her own children? What led to this? And this is that same kind of thing of like, how? And I do feel like that creates such a strong vision or such a strong thread for the reader to follow, that we're all exploring this idea together. That kind of is going to inform how I write and approach things, I think.
I think so too. I think it's a lot of, well, it feels very reflective and very introspective. It's not it doesn't feel rushed.
No.
I think like her taking that time to get to know Leslie probably is strategic in a storytelling sense of like, you come to love this girl. And even though by now we all typically know the ending, especially because of the movie. We've seen it.
Yeah.
But it just hits harder because it's like, wait, we love this girl. How come this happened? We weren't even there when it happened. We just hear news of it happening, which is how often like we hear about death anyway.
Yeah.
Like, not very frequently are people in the presence of death.
No.
It's usually through a Facebook post or a news article or a phone call.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way so in the book, spoiler, Leslie dies. She's playing in the area that they deemed Terabithia in the forest, where they like would play make believe, and she like falls into this like creek or body of water and drowns, and that's how she dies. It was like just like a freak accident. It was awful, and Jesse was supposed to be with her that day, but he wasn't. He was actually at the nation's capital with his teacher, which was a weird detail for me.
Yes.
Right? Okay, cool. Because so Jesse has a crush on his teacher, and his teacher randomly invites him to go to the museum alone with her. And I was like, the 1970s were wild.
Yeah.
And Jesse contemplates whether he wants to invite Leslie or not. And he's like, no, I'm just going to go. And he regrets it because he feels like because he didn't invite her, she died. So you have that like that guilt thing and all of those mind games that you play when you are a survivor, when someone you love has passed away. But it's I don't know if the teacher detail was important or significant. I felt like that was, I don't know. Do you think like if it had been taken out, I think that we could have still, the relationship between the teacher and Jesse was the only thing that made me feel like weird of like, that's really inappropriate of the teacher to be taking this young boy on like a day trip.
I actually wrote that as my guess as why this book was banned. It's like Miss Edmonds' relationship ? Like,
I don't think that's why
like,
it was banned at all, though. I don't think people are gonna notice it. Yeah.
Because I was reading it because she didn't even get like explicit permission from the parents. She's like, "Hey, Jesse, tell your parents we're gonna go to the Capitol," and like Jesse goes in and runs in. It's like in the morning, right? So like the parents are barely waking up, didn't even really hear him because when he came home that night, they were super worried that he was with Leslie.
Yeah.
Because they got the news of Leslie, and they're like, "Oh, Jesse, I'm so glad that you weren't with Leslie because she died." And like died in the area where you guys play a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, Miss Edmonds?
Yeah,
You didn't even
weird.
like talk to a parent? You just said, "Jesse, I'm taking you. Tell your parents I'm picking you up in 5."
Is that just the 1970s? Is that what we can
I have
just
no idea.
It feels so weird because it also feels like we've read other things from that era. Like we read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which was published in 1970, which also explores similar themes of loss and religion and all those types of questions. But I feel like they were very there were boundaries with the teachers and the children. So I don't know. Like, I don't know if it was necessary for this book. I guess it added some color to who Jesse was, that Jesse had a crush on his teacher. But it also added like a weird thing of like, there's a lot of weird stuff happening in this small town.
Yeah.
We should talk about.
Yeah, I'm like trying to think of other books that did have a teacher. Like, I think Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. There was a teacher. Greg went over to his teacher's house. Catcher in the Rye. There was a teacher relationship. Wait, no. It wasn't Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. It was Perks of Being a Wallflower. Which makes sense because it was a iteration.
But even then,
of
he
Catcher
wasn't
in the Rye.
alone with his teacher. He went over to his teacher's house because they were having dinner, and the teacher had his like fiance or something there, and the mom drove him and picked was aware of everything. And I guess this also speaks to like the relationship between Jesse and his parents, and maybe that's why it was an important detail. But I am curious why Katherine Paterson wanted to include it. But like, it was very clear that Jesse didn't have that like intimacy, that emotional intimacy with his parents. They were really overwhelmed. It felt like his dad, it felt like there was some abuse in the home that was very normalized in that community. His dad, and his dad wasn't there. He was losing his job. Like there was a lot of insecurity in every way with his family. So I wonder if that just like spoke to that a little bit more. But I if we did have Katherine here, I would like to ask her why.
Yeah.
Why was that an important detail? So similar to Twilight, why did Jacob have to imprint on the baby?
Renesmee.
Yeah, like why? I think the story would have been just as strong without that really bizarre thing. But maybe there was no other way to get Jesse out of the house or Jesse out of the town, you know?
Without him bringing Leslie along?
Yeah, maybe that was the only way that he would be gone. So
like,
Leslie could die and move the narrative along. I don't know.
Yeah. But I feel like even like just a simple crush on another girl in school. But I don't know. Maybe it's all to like paint the innocence of it all and him.
Yeah.
I don't want to read like too into it, but like a loss of innocence of like being with an older woman. Just kidding.
Yeah. And
that's
also
definitely reading way too into it.
For sure. There's absolutely no evidence of abuse or anything like that. But there's a theme throughout the book and this community that they're like in talking about that insecurity or loss of innocence, that like even the popular girl in school, people find out that she's being abused by her father. That causes like a whole thing. And Jesse and Leslie become friends with her. But like there are multiple themes of like financial insecurity and emotional insecurity with everyone in this town. Because even when Leslie moves in, Jesse's like, I don't need to get to know her because no one lives in that house long enough. They always move. No one wants to stay here long enough. And there's a lot of talk about people losing their jobs and people working, and about farmers not being able to survive off of their work
Living.
at all. Yeah, they're not able to live without taking on tons and tons of extra labor. So you get that sense of it, and then it just feels like the whole community is kind of teetering at all times.
Yeah.
And so maybe that is part of that too, is like there's just a lot of weird boundaries, not a lot of like structure, and a lot of people making sense of things for in the moment as they can.
And like with the popular girl who it comes out that she is being abused, I feel like there was no closure on that. Like no adults interfered.
No.
I'm like, is this another 1970s thing? Like,
well, I do think that was realistic to my high school. Like we'd hear something horrible about something, and everyone just knew, and no one did anything. You know, because like, what do you do as a kid? Is just like, well, that person. Everyone is going through stuff. But even like the adults
didn't seem to do anything. Like Miss Edmonds, I think she should have taken out that girl instead of Jesse. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Was it clear that Miss Edmonds knew about it?
I think that there was mention that like teachers were talking about it too, because like kids were talking about it loud enough that teachers were
you're
hearing.
Right. You're so right. Yeah. Yeah, it just felt like a really unhealthy community.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's true to Catherine's community that she was living in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but it was very fascinating. It was a very interesting portrayal. Like the thing that stuck with me most was I was like, oh, this feels like small town America.
Mm-hmm.
In all the intersections of hard things that are happening economically and spiritually and all those other things. And people go to church and then are judgy about the people that don't go to church, but no one's really finding the answers, and they're all just holding on to what they can in order to keep surviving. And the only time there is emotional intimacy or like some sort of foundation of like, oh, Jesse's gonna be okay, is when his dad talks to him honestly about Leslie's death. Like that's really the only time I felt like, oh, they're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Because Jesse was even abusive to his younger sister. Do you remember that? When he like beat her? And I was like, what?
A lot of sad, and a lot of like teasing and like a lot of maybe passing the border of teasing.
Yeah, I think so.
I wonder what you think of. So, like, you're talking about the circumstances of this small town and how, like, everyone seems to be struggling with something. Leslie's family moves in, and they're actually quite affluent, and they kind of feel like, oh, we're gonna move to a small town because we're tired of the big city life, and we want to give farming a try or something like that. Very ballerina farm vibes.
100%. Like the parents were both like highly educated, a lot of opportunities. I think they're both writers. They didn't have a TV because they valued the creativity, and yet the school totally made fun of Leslie. Like her classmates were super judgy and mocked her for not having a TV, and to the point where Jessie was like, I'm going to buy her a TV so she can finally fit in. But that's just not what her family valued. And she had access to a lot of things. Like she had all the comic books and, you know.
Yeah. And she even, there was one point where Jesse was like talking about money. He's like, well, this is going to cost a lot. And Leslie at one point, this is where I was like, she wouldn't know this as an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. She looks at him and was like, Jesse, money isn't an issue. I'm like, okay, I don't think you would know that unless like maybe that's something she's parroting from back home. Like,
yeah, maybe
she's seeing like the struggles of her classmates and going up to her parents and talking about it, and her parents are like, money's not an issue with us, you know?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe that is a big part of their family culture, is being proud of having lots of money. I don't know. But the parents were also fascinating because like her parents developed a relationship with Jesse as well. But it didn't feel like any of the parents were developing relationships with each other. Like, but granted, this is from Jesse's perspective. They were the total opposite of the rest of the town. There was a point where Jesse was watching Leslie's mom, who was like talking, and then she's like, oh, I've got an idea. And then she left and she went and wrote. And Jessie was like, I wonder if my mom would be a different person if she had an outlet, if she cared about anything outside of just survival. And that was a really interesting introspection that I really loved kind of hearing about. And we get into like sexism also, but with the gender roles of his parents and also his expectations for being the fastest boy. And then Leslie beats him and he's like, what the heck? How did that happen? She's a girl. And I think that, a lot was packed into this book really quickly. But I found it interesting that the parents, after their daughter died, they just moved away. After the funeral, it was very ballerina form. They were moving there to cosplay as rural Americans. And they had the privilege to be able to leave when the trauma had happened. Whereas other people when they are living in daily trauma and they can't leave.
Yeah.
That was fascinating.
That's really deep for a children's book. Like,
yeah.
Like us trying to grapple with it as adults reading it for the first time, just like, why was this included? And like, how, obviously money is privilege, but like, what are the things we can easily walk away from versus other people?
Yeah. I'm curious what was pulled from real experience in Katherine's community and what she created for the book, because it felt very realistic, all of this stuff. But I do think it's kind of tricky when I don't like the idea of when a character is like kind of plopped in. They do this in like Fault in Our Stars and other books like that. And there's a tragic death and then they just disappear. And that character was only used to die. And that's kind of how it felt about Leslie, was like she plopped in magically. She was an outsider, plops in, dies, and then they leave. And there's no grappling with like this family went through all these transitions. They came to the community and now they have to transition again in this new space. Like it's just like a triple whammy over and over again of traumatic experiences. And I'm kind of tired of that trope, to be honest. Yeah, so that was I think that's like that and The Teacher were my two things where I was like, could have been better, Katherine. Just kidding. It's incredible. And she's such an amazing writer. And it was such a joy. It was really fun to read, honestly. It was a really great book to read. I loved getting into Jessie's mind. But those were two things that I was like, interesting. I wonder if that was of the times or why. Why were those choices made in writing it? Do you think this book would be received if it was published today with no changes? Do you think it'd be received the same way it was in the 1970s, Eden?
That's a good question. With no changes?
Yeah,
well, considering how we're both like really confused about Miss Edmonds, I would make changes to Miss Edmonds and the girl who is abused and it came out that she was abused. I think those would be the problematic things that I would bring up if it was today. But I thought it was otherwise it feels kind of timeless.
Yeah, I felt that way too. And I felt like talking about, I haven't read a YA book about living in financial insecurity or just to say poverty this way, in a way that felt so real and so relatable and so not like being poor was the whole plot, but it was just the context of this whole community. I thought that it was effortless, and it created a good nuance in when we talk about kind of forsaken communities in our country. I loved that. I think that was amazing. But the Miss Edmonds thing was weird.
Yeah.
And talking about like those stresses and domestic violence and abuse and things like that often are found in communities that are ravaged by poverty because of lack of resources and other things like that. I do think that book would still work today. I just think the Miss Edmonds thing was like, This is so clearly, she's so clearly grooming Jesse.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
there's so many boundaries here. Like, he should not feel comfortable going on a long road trip with this lady randomly.
Mm-mm.
Even if he does have a crush on her.
Yeah. And to go with your point. To going with your point about like poverty being the backdrop, like it never felt like Jesse complained about it. It was just
Mm-mm.
a fact
Yeah.
of life. And even when he was on his quote unquote date with Miss Edmonds, like Miss
Field trip,
Edmonds
Eden. Field
field
trip.
trip. Field trip. Like Miss Edmonds said something like, "Oh, like because they went to get lunch too during their field trip, and
Yeah.
Miss Edmonds is like, Jesse, I'm a liberated woman, so I'm going to be paying for you." And Jesse, like in his mind, was like, "Oh, like breathe a sigh of relief because, heck no, was I going to be able to like afford being able to pay for
Yeah.
her meal." But it was more of like a passing thought of like, okay, phew, she's got this. Like she is a
Yeah.
liberated woman, rather
Yeah.
than not something that he thought about going into it. Of just
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is just a kind of like poverty. You kind of live moment to moment.
Mm-hmm. And it's always in the background, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think, like, for people who have experienced financial insecurity, like, that was so real. That whole moment of like,
Mhm.
how am I going to navigate this? Because I
Mhm.
literally cannot afford this.
Mhm.
How am I going to deal with that? And I think, yeah, it didn't, but it wasn't the whole plot. I just think Katherine did a really good job of balancing that. I feel like if it was written today, someone would have made that the entire plot, the entire identity
Yeah.
of Jesse. And they did, and she didn't do that at all. Like, it was just the context of which we were telling the story.
Mhm.
Yeah, fascinating. I don't have any other thoughts or themes from it.
I have one more thing.
Yes, please.
Because probably the main reason why this was banned was because a kid dies in it.
Yes.
And at the end of my audiobook, there was an interview with David and Katherine, and they said some things that I really loved. They said, "Everyone will have to go through death, their own and the death of those they love before they die. A book in which a child dies is sort of a rehearsal for that. We hope the child would not have to go through it as early as David did, but it gives them a chance to go through these emotions vicariously."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like one of the, like this being written in 1977, one of the first books to address the death of a child and the death of a friendship.
Mm.
And it's like unfortunate that adults, man, adults don't feel that children can handle issues like this. And how some adults feel like death is not age appropriate for 10-year-olds. Katherine Paterson's retort to that is, no, it's not, but it happens. Like,
Yeah.
what, we're not giving kids the tools to deal with grief by pretending it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, like, because the first time I was exposed to death was when my younger sister's best friend's dad was killed in a car accident. And it was like, it really rocked our community. And it was around Christmas time, and it was just like horrific. And that was like the first time I was really exposed to, like, oh, this is really unjust, this is really unfair, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to act, I don't know how to be around people. And like, should I be happy still somehow, like, there were a lot
Yeah.
of questions about the logistics of grieving that I was confused about as like a third grader, or maybe I was in fourth grade, but it was very confusing for me. And I feel like our generation, millennials, we lucked out because we had a lot of media, like all the American Girl stories, Little Princess, all those horrific movies and books about children dying, that it didn't feel out of my, like, it was an idea that was familiar to me, even if I hadn't lived it yet. So when this person did die, I was able to, like, kind of, I had resources. I had the Little Match Girl, all those,
Yeah.
like, really like very heavy Victorian books about children dying of, like, malaria and whatever.
Yeah.
But that was helpful. And I just feel like knowing that it's a possibility is the first step in knowing how to deal with it. When it's not a possibility in your life, I think the shock of something that horrible happening, I just think you're starting from like way, 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 way back on the healing journey.
Yeah.
Way further back than you need to. There is always a possibility, and it sucks that you shouldn't anticipate it, but knowing that it is possible is helpful.
And I think it like, what a great book to prepare a child too, who would grow up in a religious household.
Yeah.
To grapple with those questions of, oh, is my friend going to hell? Is my friend's dad going to hell? Like, what is hell? Who goes there?
Yeah.
And why? And why do bad things happen?
Yeah. And having a model of how you can ask that and that someone can give you an answer of their perspective, and that it might not match your local preacher's perspective, because his dad clearly didn't say the same thing that his preacher would have said. But I think that is such a, any sort of model of like honest communication of a parent and a child, I think is invaluable.
Yeah.
More representation on that one.
One of the first books I remember reading in school, it's the one on the yellow fever. Fever 1773 or whatever.
Oh, I've never heard of this, but
You've
I'm
never
excited.
heard of it? But yeah, just like a girl dealing with the pandemic. Just like how who knew that would be relatable?
How timely.
How timely? Yeah.
Yeah. I would have loved a book that could have given me insight to the paranoia of mass illness that I was going to feel. Yeah. Like truly fascinating. I don't have any other thoughts about this book other than it was incredible. I need to watch the movie still.
Oh yeah?
So maybe I'll watch that.
I don't know if I've seen the movie. I just know that Anna Sophia Robb is in it, and funnily enough, in like 1 week I was watching Ripley, which has Dakota Fanning, who I haven't seen since, I guess, Twilight. Before that, what does she do?
Sweet Home Alabama. That's her only movies. I'm just kidding. She was in that. She was a young Reese Witherspoon.
Oh. Well, yeah, I always confused her and Anna Sophia Robb. And
for sure.
The same week I watched Ripley, I also watched Rebel Ridge. And Anna Sophia Robb was in that. I was like, what is with these young blonde child actresses popping back up into my life?
There was an era where they only hired like the palest of the pale blonde girl.
Yeah.
And they're like, that's what we want. That's what we want. And now they're all like in their full adulthood doing their big work. It was very specific.
Very specific.
Yeah.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. And I think it's Josh Hutcherson too, right?
Yes. Yes, it is.
That's Jessie.
Yes.
And I think Miss Edmonds is Zooey Deschanel, which feels appropriate for the type of character. Not any disses on Zoe.
Zoe,
like,
we don't think you're
Zoe
a child
was
groomer,
a
but
teacher. She would do this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was banned because of the religious stuff.
Religious stuff?
Yeah, I think so. And the child dying.
Yeah. Okay, let's look it up.
Okay.
Yeah, this novel's contents has been a frequent target of censors. It ranks number 8 on the ALA's most commonly challenged books in the US during the 90s. It was number 28 in the 2000s. And the challenges stem from death being part of the plot. Jessie's frequent use of the word Lord outside of prayer. Allegations that it promotes secular humanism, New Age religion, occultism, and Satanism. And for use of offensive language. Did we read the same book?
I don't remember the Satanism.
I have no idea. Yeah.
Was it because of, is there like make-believe land, is there witchcraft involved?
I have no idea.
I don't know. Fascinating.
Very fascinating. I had, don't remember any Satanism.
Neither do I. I would have, though. I would have been really keyed in on that one.
Definitely. Well, yeah, especially since we are reading from the perspective of this book is banned.
I know. I don't. There's no good reason.
Last book, or not last book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, we both forgot the fact that it's queer.
Oh, right. Maybe we're just so used to Satan content. Yeah. We're just so adept to any occult. Mm-hmm. We're just we're in it. We're women. Therefore. Yeah.
Well, sweet. Our next book is Laurie Halse Anderson's Speak.
Yay.
I'm quite excited for that.
Which is incredible. Honestly, I read it for the first time. I highly recommend. Everyone read it.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. See you when I see you.
See you when I see you. And please rate and subscribe.
Yes, please. Please.
Thank you.
Bye.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicola Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicole, and performed by my dad, Frank.
What's causing the rise in book banning? On my podcast, Velshi Banned Book Club, I speak with authors of banned books to try and find out.
I think what they're really objecting to is that a young person has perceived the hypocrisy and corruption of the generation that has created their world.
This book saved me in a lot of ways, and then I published it hoping to help people find a blueprint to heal.
Season 2 of Velshi Banned Book Club. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.